The palace has finally spoken, and the world is in shock. After months of silence, Buckingham Palace has confirmed what many feared, but no one wanted to believe. King Charles has chosen the date of his abdication, and the news is far more heartbreaking than anyone imagined. The cameras may show calm corridors and polite smiles, but behind those gilded gates sorrow hangs like a shadow. What could drive a monarch who waited more than 7 decades for the throne to walk away so soon? Tonight, we uncover the truth behind the palace statement, the hidden reason behind the decision, and the emotional farewell that could change royal history forever. Stay with us and subscribe for more royal revelations. The whisper that shook the palace. It began not with a grand announcement, but with a whisper. A quiet conversation overheard in a gilded corridor. A single message passed to a trusted journalist. And within hours, the rumor spread like a spark in dry grass. Someone inside Buckingham Palace had leaked that King Charles had privately chosen the date of his abdication. The claim sounded impossible, almost absurd, yet it carried the ring of truth that sent shivers through the royal press. For a king who had waited more than 70 years to ascend the throne, the idea of stepping down so soon seemed unthinkable. And yet, something in the nation's mood shifted that morning, as if instinctively sensing that history was about to turn a corner. At first, the palace refused to comment. Official spokespeople dismissed the story as fiction, an invention of the tabloids, desperate for headlines. But the silence that followed their denial only deepened the suspicion. Journalists who had covered the royal family for decades began receiving messages from unnamed sources. There were whispers of a meeting held behind closed doors, attended by senior courtiers and advisers. The word abdication had reportedly been spoken not as speculation but as a decision. Soon newsrooms across London erupted into chaos. Editors demanded verification. Phones rang through the night, and television anchors prepared emergency coverage. By the next day, the story had overtaken every other headline. King considering abdication appeared on every front page. Crowds gathered outside the palace gates, their faces a mix of disbelief and dread. Some dismissed it as gossip, yet others saw meaning in the king's recent public absences, his fatigue, and his increasingly reflective tone during speeches. For months he had spoken of legacy, of continuity, of preparing the nation for the future. What once sounded like wisdom now felt like farewell. Inside the palace, tension grew unbearable. Advisers scrambled to control the narrative, but the damage was done. The corridors buzzed with uncertainty as even staff members who had served the royal family for decades whispered among themselves. Was the king truly planning to step down? Had his health worsened? Or was this a decision born of deeper emotion, exhaustion, loss, or private sorrow? Late-night talk shows filled with speculation. Experts dissected every past interview, searching for clues they might have missed. Every cancelled appearance, every subtle gesture was reinterpreted. The British public, long accustomed to royal resilience, found itself grappling with a painful possibility that the king might not endure as his mother had, that his reign could end before it had truly begun. The palace gates became a symbol of mystery, the threshold between what the world was told and what the family knew. Each day new reports surfaced, each one more detailed than the last. The whispers grew into a storm, and by the end of the week the story was no longer treated as rumor, but as inevitability. The question was no longer whether King Charles would abdicate, but when, and beneath the surface of that question lay something even more haunting. Why the weight of the crown? From the moment the crown was placed upon his head, King Charles carried not just gold and jewels, but the invisible weight of centuries. Every eye in Westminster Abbey had been fixed upon him, every heartbeat in the nation synchronized with his own. It was the moment he had been destined for since birth, the culmination of a lifetime of waiting. Yet beneath the solemn music and glittering ceremony there was a flicker of something unspoken in his gaze, The awareness that the price of finally wearing the crown might be greater than the honour of receiving it, Charles had waited longer than any heir in British history. For decades he had lived in the shadow of his mother's legendary reign, shaping his public identity around patience and restraint. When the throne finally became his, the nation expected renewal, stability, and quiet strength, but time is a merciless companion. The king's first year on the throne was marked by unrelenting scrutiny. The endless cycle of travel, ceremonies, and constitutional duties that allowed little rest. The man who had once spent hours walking his gardens and painting in solitude now found himself confined by schedule and protocol. At first he met the strain with dignity. His speeches carried warmth, his public engagements were steady, and his devotion to service seemed unshaken. Yet behind palace walls those close to him began to notice changes. The long days left him visibly weary. His once energetic stride slowed, his hands trembled slightly when he signed official documents, and moments of absent-minded silence began to punctuate his conversations. Courtiers described him as reflective, sometimes distant, as though his mind lingered elsewhere. The pressure mounted quietly. The monarchy, though symbolic, remains an unending responsibility. Each appearance demanded perfection. Each word carried national weight. The media scrutinized his expressions. The internet dissected his every move, and the public compared him endlessly to the late queen. No human heart could bear such constant contrast without faltering. And while Charles had inherited her duty, he had not inherited her immortal patience. Health concerns began circulating among those closest to the royal household. Cancelled engagements were explained away as routine adjustments, but insiders whispered that the king's doctors had recommended more rest. The once endless calendar of appearances was trimmed down, though few dared to ask why. In quieter moments, Charles reportedly confided to friends that he sometimes felt the world had grown too heavy to carry. "I have served all my life," he was overheard saying. "Perhaps the crown was meant for someone with more strength than I have left." That confession, though never officially acknowledged, echoed through the halls of the palace. Advisers worried that the strain was no longer sustainable. The king's sense of duty had always been his armour, but even armour cracks when worn too long. As weeks passed, the weight of expectation pressed harder. The monarchy demanded endurance. Yet the man behind the title was mortal. His body aged, his heart tired, and the dream that once felt eternal began to feel fleeting. The question whispered through every chamber and corridor, soft yet undeniable: was the king losing the strength to continue, or had the crown itself become too heavy to bear? A monarch in decline, behind the ornate doors of Buckingham Palace, the whispers have grown impossible to silence. Courtiers speak in lowered tones, their eyes weary with concern. Those who see the king up close know the truth that the world is only beginning to suspect. The long days, endless ceremonies, and constant travel have taken their toll. The man who once embodied resilience now moves with careful precision. His once confident gestures slowed by unseen fatigue. What began as a quiet concern has become a matter that even the most loyal aides can no longer dismiss. The sovereign, who waited more than 7 decades for his throne, is now fighting a battle not with his people, but with time itself. In recent months, reports of cancelled appearances have multiplied. The official explanations always sound benign. Scheduling conflicts, minor ailments, unforeseen weather, but within the palace, different narrative circulates. Those responsible for managing the royal calendar speak of sudden pauses, unexpected retreats, and long stretches of rest that had never been part of the king's disciplined routine. His visits to Balmoral have grown longer, his need for solitude more pronounced. At first, it seemed like an understandable desire for peace, but soon even that retreat began to feel like an unspoken withdrawal. Doctors who attend to the royal household have reportedly urged moderation. The pressures of royal duty, they warn, are no small matter for a man in his 70s. They advise more rest, fewer engagements, and less travel. Yet the king resists. He has spent his life preparing for this role, and he is determined not to appear weak. Every public outing becomes a performance of strength. Every wave to the crowd is both a gesture of gratitude and an act of defiance against the limits of his own body. Those closest to him see the struggle most clearly. His longtime aides describe him as kind yet stubborn, aware of his frailty, but unwilling to surrender to it. He often insists on working late into the night, reviewing documents, writing letters by hand, and reading through the briefings prepared for the next day. Yet when the cameras roll, he hides the pain behind a practiced smile. He continues to smile for his people, to perform every duty expected of him. But those smiles now carry the unmistakable shadow of endurance. The king's resolve remains, but his body, once his greatest servant, has begun to betray him. And though the nation may not yet know it, a quiet battle is being fought behind palace walls, one between loyalty to the crown and the inescapable decline of the man who wears it. The decision no king wants to make. It was late in the evening when the meeting was called. The palace corridors were quiet, the press unaware, and only a handful of trusted figures were summoned to the private chamber. The king sat at the head of the long oak table, his expression unreadable, the weight of history resting on his shoulders. Around him sat senior courtiers, the prime minister, and his most loyal advisers. The topic none wished to speak aloud had finally reached the point where it could no longer be ignored. The question was simple yet devastating. Should the king serve until his final breath, or should he step aside before frailty forced the nation to witness his decline? For hours the room was filled with uneasy silence broken only by cautious words. Advisers spoke of duty, of the oath sworn on the day of his coronation. Others, more compassionate, urged him to consider his health and the example he would set by leaving with dignity rather than desperation. The prime minister's tone was measured and respectful, but his message was clear. The public had begun to notice the king's struggle. The once unshakable image of steadfast strength was showing cracks, and the monarchy's stability was at risk. Charles listened quietly, his fingers interlaced, his eyes lowered. Each voice carried its own truth. Yet none could ease the conflict raging within him. He had waited longer than any heir in history. His reign, though brief, had been marked by effort and reform. He had modernized the royal household, championed environmental causes, and sought to bring warmth and accessibility to an ancient institution. Yet now, faced with the limits of his body, he wondered whether holding on would strengthen the monarchy or diminish it. Behind his calm demeanor, 1,000 memories collided. He thought of his mother, who had reigned until her final breath, her unwavering sense of duty guiding her through every trial. He had promised to follow her example, to serve his people for as long as God granted him life. But he also remembered her private moments of exhaustion, the toll that endless devotion had taken. He loved her legacy, yet he feared repeating her sacrifice. When the discussion turned to the question of succession, the room grew colder. To abdicate was not merely to retire. It was to hand the weight of the crown to another. His son William was capable and admired. Yet Charles could not ignore the sorrow that came with yielding the throne he had waited his whole life to inherit. The legacy he had built, the identity he had carried, all stood before him like a mirror demanding truth. At last the king spoke. His voice was steady but quiet. He thanked them all for their honesty, their loyalty, and their friendship. He said he would pray on it, seek divine guidance, and return with his decision. As the room emptied and the great doors closed, he remained seated in silence, staring at the crown resting on the nearby table. It gleamed faintly in the dim light, both beautiful and cruel. In that moment he understood what no monarch ever wishes to admit, that even a crown in all its glory cannot protect a heart that longs for peace. Camilla's breaking point. Within the silent corridors of the palace, the queen consort has become a figure of quiet sorrow. Camilla, once the unshakable pillar beside the king, now finds herself standing at the edge of helplessness. For decades she has been his confidant, his companion, and the one person who truly understood the man behind the royal mask. Yet lately she has watched the light in his eyes dim and his laughter fade. The weight of the crown, so long anticipated, has begun to crush the spirit of the man she loves. The throne that once seemed a symbol of destiny has turned into a burden neither of them can escape. Those closest to the royal household speak in whispers of her anguish. Behind the public poise and polite smiles lies a woman fighting a private battle of the heart. She has seen the toll that endless duty and expectation have taken on Charles. In the quiet of the night, when the palace falls still, she has reportedly pleaded with him to rest, to slow down, to choose life over legacy. Her words, though gentle, come from desperation. "You have given enough," she is said to have told him more than once. But her husband, raised in the shadow of duty, finds it nearly impossible to yield. Friends describe her struggle as one of love and restraint. Camilla has never been one to interfere with matters of state. She respects the sanctity of the crown, the role of monarch, and the duty that defines it. Yet she also knows that beneath the regal robe stands a frail man, exhausted by expectation, watching him hide his pain before the world has become unbearable. When she looks at him during formal events, she can see the effort it takes for him to maintain his composure. His smiles are thinner now, his movements slower, his silence is longer. Behind closed doors, their conversations have grown more emotional. She urges him to think of his health, of their family, of the peace that still remains within reach. But Charles resists, torn between her compassion and his vow. For him to relinquish the crown would feel like failure, an abandonment of his lifelong purpose. Camilla understands this. Yet it breaks her heart to know that his devotion may one day destroy him. Her staff speak of moments when she retreats into solitude, her composure finally breaking. In those private hours, tears replace the calm that defines her public image. She fears not only for her husband's health, but for the emptiness that might follow should he continue to push beyond his limits. To ask a king to let go of his crown is to ask him to surrender his very identity, and she knows it. Still, love gives her no choice but to try. As she walks beside him in public, her hand sometimes brushing his arm for reassurance. The cameras capture only grace and dignity. Yet behind those images lies a truth the world cannot see. A woman silently pleading with her king to choose life over legacy, knowing that whichever he chooses, their love will bear the cost. William's reluctant rise. As whispers of abdication spread beyond the palace walls, one name begins to dominate every conversation. Prince William, the future king who once appeared comfortably distant from the weight of the throne, now finds himself at the very center of royal destiny. Every newspaper headline, every television report, every quiet conversation within the corridors of power carries his name. Behind the polished smile and calm demeanor lies a man wrestling with uncertainty. Is he truly ready to inherit a crown wrapped in controversy and grief? The kingdom's stability, and perhaps its very future, is slowly shifting onto his shoulders. Inside Kensington Palace, the atmosphere has grown tense. Advisors move quietly through the halls, preparing transition documents and discreetly coordinating with senior staff. They speak in cautious tones, aware that any leak could ignite another media firestorm. William listens patiently during their briefings, his face composed, his words few. Yet those who know him well can see the burden growing heavier by the day. He has always carried himself with duty, but this is different. This is the moment where duty begins to feel like destiny, and destiny begins to feel like a sentence. Catherine stands as his anchor amid the rising storm. Calm, wise, and resolute, she senses the weight of what lies ahead. In private moments she reminds him of the quiet strength he has always shown, the grace inherited not from privilege, but from perseverance. She knows the nation already looks to them as the steady hands of the next chapter. Yet she also sees the toll it takes on him, the sleepless nights, the distant gaze during family dinners, the quiet sigh when the world is not watching. Behind the scenes, preparations continue. Meetings once held by King Charles are quietly transferred to his son. Foreign dignitaries request audiences not only with the king, but with the prince. Palace officials adjust seating arrangements at official events, signaling to insiders that the transition is no longer a matter of speculation but of timing. Each gesture, each subtle change becomes another confirmation that the inevitable is drawing near. The public, still processing the possibility of the king's departure, turns its attention toward the couple who represent the monarchy's future. Crowds outside royal engagements chant William's name, their cheers filled with hope and sorrow in equal measure. The nation wants reassurance that the legacy will endure, that the crown will not crumble under the weight of loss. Yet within William's heart uncertainty lingers. He has always honored his father, always respected the immense sacrifice that leadership demands. But stepping into that same role now feels like walking into a storm without shelter. Late at night, when the palace falls silent, William stands by the window, staring at the distant lights of London. The crown he will soon inherit is not a symbol of glory, but of endurance, a reminder that monarchy is as much about survival as it is about ceremony. The next generation stands on the edge of destiny whether they are ready or not. And in that quiet moment, the future king whispers a silent prayer, not for power, but for strength. The leak becomes reality. It happened quietly at first, almost too carefully to believe. A short message from Buckingham Palace appeared on official letterhead, released just before dawn. Its language was formal, measured, and deliberate. Yet beneath every word lay a tremor of finality. The statement confirmed what the nation had dreaded for weeks. His Majesty, the king, had chosen an abdication date. In a single sentence, centuries of tradition seemed to tremble. What had begun as a rumor was now a royal reality. The reign that took more than 7 decades to begin would end before its promise was fulfilled. Within minutes, the news swept across every screen and every device in the kingdom. Television anchors broke into regular programming, their voices solemn and unsteady. Radio hosts spoke in disbelief, their tones caught between reverence and sorrow. Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds began to gather, some holding flags, others holding photographs of the king and queen. Many stood in silence as if awaiting further explanation, as if hoping the next statement might somehow undo the first. The palace press office issued a brief follow-up, offering little detail beyond gratitude for the public's understanding. No reason was given, no medical diagnosis confirmed, no political tension admitted. Only one fact stood clear. The king would step down on a date that had already been set and agreed upon in consultation with the Prime Minister and the Privy Council. The statement ended with a few words of humility and reflection, assuring the people that the decision had been made in peace and prayer. But peace was not what followed. In homes across Britain, families sat together in stunned silence. For many, this was more than a political transition. It was an emotional rupture. The king had become a symbol of continuity in a world that felt increasingly uncertain. To imagine him no longer reigning was to confront change itself. Some wept openly, remembering the joy of his coronation not long ago. Others felt anger, confusion, even betrayal. How could a monarch who waited his entire life for the throne now walk away from it so soon? The global reaction was immediate. Networks from every continent interrupted broadcasts with breaking coverage. The king's image filled screens in New York, Paris, Sydney, and Tokyo. commentators spoke of shock waves throughout the Commonwealth of constitutional implications of emotional fallout. Leaders around the world issued statements of respect, expressing admiration for his years of service and understanding for his decision. Yet beneath the diplomacy, there lingered one unspoken sentiment: disbelief. The nation reacts. The morning after the announcement, the United Kingdom awoke to a silence unlike any before. The streets were calm, yet the air carried an undeniable heaviness. Every front page bore the same headline in solemn lettering: "The King steps down." For some it was an act of grace. For others it was a wound that would not heal. The nation that had stood united behind its monarch now found itself divided by emotion. In towns and cities voices rose in debate, tears mingled with anger, and the heart of Britain seemed to beat with confusion. Outside Buckingham Palace hundreds gathered in a quiet vigil, candles flickered through the evening mist, the soft glow reflecting on tearful faces. People of all ages came, veterans who had served under the king's patronage, children who waved tiny Union Jacks, and ordinary citizens who simply wanted to stand near the gates that now symbolized both pride and heartbreak. Some spoke of understanding, praising the king's humility for stepping aside before frailty could tarnish his legacy. Others whispered of betrayal, of promises broken, of vows made before God and country that now felt unfinished. The news channels ran constant coverage, switching between scenes of mourning and panels of experts dissecting every phrase of the royal statement. Constitutional scholars spoke of procedure, of smooth succession, of how carefully the transition had been planned. But the analysts' calm explanations could not quiet the emotion of the people. For many the monarchy was not a system of governance, but a family. And now that family felt fractured. Parliament opened its session with a moment of silence. The Prime Minister stood before the chamber, his voice steady but sombre, praising the king's decades of service and lifelong devotion to the country. Opposition leaders followed, each offering words of gratitude and sorrow. Across the political spectrum the tone was unified. Respect for the king, uncertainty for what would follow. International leaders soon added their voices. From Washington to Ottawa, from Canberra to New Delhi, statements poured in honoring the monarch's grace, his advocacy for environmental causes, and his quiet strength in modernizing the crown. Flags across several Commonwealth nations were lowered in tribute. Yet, amid the tributes and tears, a quiet question began to echo through every broadcast, every newspaper, and every conversation. What happens to the monarchy now? The public's faith in the royal institution had been tested before, but never like this. King Charles's abdication marked not only the end of his reign, but a shift in the identity of the crown itself. Some saw in this moment a chance for renewal, a transition to a younger generation, a modern monarchy better suited to a changing world. Others saw it as the beginning of decline, the unravelling of something ancient and sacred. As night fell once more over London, the palace remained lit, its windows glowing softly against the dark sky. Outside, the crowds stayed long after midnight, singing hymns and leaving handwritten letters at the gates. The kingdom was grieving, divided, yet united in sorrow. The crown would pass on as it always had, but the memory of the king who chose to let go would forever linger. A reminder that even the mightiest symbol of power can bend beneath the weight of human frailty, the last bow of a king. The morning of the abdication dawned grey and still, as though the sky itself understood the gravity of the moment. Outside Buckingham Palace, thousands gathered in hushed reverence. Flags fluttered softly in the wind, their muted colours reflecting the sombre tone of the day. The gates, which had stood closed through weeks of speculation and sorrow, finally opened. From within emerged the familiar figure of King Charles, dressed not in regal splendour, but in quiet simplicity, a dark suit, a white shirt, and a single medal pinned close to his heart. The man who had carried the weight of the crown now carried only the burden of goodbye. As he stepped toward the podium, the crowd fell silent. Cameras from across the world captured his every movement. The moment had been anticipated, dreaded, and debated, but no one was truly prepared for it. When he began to speak, his voice trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from emotion. He thanked his people for their loyalty, their patience, and their love. He spoke of service, of family, of the years that had shaped his life, and the nation he had sworn to serve. He expressed gratitude for the grace shown to him through seasons of triumph and trial. Each word carried the weight of finality, yet every sentence radiated warmth and humility. He paused often, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. He smiled faintly when he spoke of his mother, recalling her example of lifelong duty and devotion. He spoke softly of Camilla, calling her his greatest strength, his constant comfort through every storm. And then, with visible pain, he admitted what everyone already knew, that time had caught up with him. "There comes a moment," he said, "when even a king must bow to the will of time and the wisdom of peace." The crowd remained utterly still, listening to the words that would mark the end of an era. When he finished, there was a long aching silence. Then came the applause, gentle at first, then rising into a roar that echoed through the courtyard and spilled into the streets beyond. Many wept openly. Some whispered prayers. The king bowed his head once deeply and deliberately, as if sealing the moment into history. He turned and walked slowly back toward the grand palace doors. The camera followed him until he reached the threshold, where an ornate chair, the same one he had used at his coronation, sat empty beside the throne. The shot lingered on that chair, its velvet cushion untouched, its gold frame glinting faintly in the light. It was a haunting symbol of what had been relinquished, not power, but purpose. As the palace gates closed once more, the world understood that this was not a farewell born of scandal or failure. It was the final act of a man who had given all he could. His reign ended not in disgrace, but in dignity. The image of the empty chair remained long after the cameras stopped rolling. A quiet testament to the cost of destiny and the grace with which one man chose to let it go. The abdication of King Charles marks more than the end of a reign. It is the closing of a lifetime defined by duty, endurance, and sacrifice. His final act was not weakness, but wisdom, a farewell offered with humility and grace. As the nation stands at a new threshold, hearts remain divided, yet united in gratitude for a man who gave everything to his calling. The empty throne now waits for a new chapter, one history will judge in its own time. But for today, the world pauses to honor a king's last bow. If this story moved you, share it. Let the world remember that even kings are human and true greatness is found in letting go. Also remember to subscribe to this channel.